The Andrews government today is under fire over the sale of the old Glenormiston Agricultural College to a China-based banker. The 300-hectare property near Terang in southwestern Victoria was reportedly sold to a businessman, Dean Montgomery, for less than $5 million. Victorian MP Mr Riordan says it's worth almost 3 times that sum. According to Riordan, Victorian taxpayers have been ripped off yet again. He joins me now from Melbourne. Richard, help my viewers out. For those outside of Victoria, not perhaps aware of how sought after the land in the Western District down near Terang is, explain to them the sort of value that the Glenormiston property would normally realise in an auction.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Look, Western Victoria is probably some of the best farmland anywhere in Australia. Where Glenormiston is pretty much the home of dairy. It's beautiful country and it's worth a lot of money on a bad day, Peter. And not only that, Glenormiston is a massive old heritage homestead. The particular house was built in around 1900. It's filled with somewhere between $1.5 to $3 million worth of priceless wood carvings that were gifted by the family when they gave the estate to the government to become an agricultural college. Now, recent sales in the region of fine old homesteads and very productive land of a workable scale. This property on a bad day is probably worth $15 million. But you've got to remember, Peter, it's got a massive amount of extra facilities there. There's swimming pools, squash courts, accommodation for 200. It was built as a very, very smart and well-equipped university campus back in the 70s. So it's relatively up to date. It's beautifully landscaped. There's heritage listings on it everywhere. To any sort of developer or person who wanted to buy it for their own personal or corporate use, $15 or $20 million is a steal. We found out this week in Parliament, or late last week in Parliament, that the government's given it away for just over $4.5 million, and the person that and the organisation that's got it, they've had it for 5 or 6 years. They don't settle until 2024. This is just quite an outrage, and it's really upsetting locals who have great love of the place, but more importantly, other farmers and business people who go, well, that's just crazy. How do we get a deal like that?
So let me interrupt you then. And I know Glenormiston well. My sister went to that ag college. It was affiliated at one time with Melbourne University. It's got a very good name. Help me understand, how does something get sold 4 years ago, not disclosed, not known about, and the transaction doesn't occur for another year? How many years hence from here? I can't follow that.
Well, that's the question we're all asking, Peter. By a slip of bureaucracy, the sale price was snuck out to us in parliamentary hearings last week. We've now since trying to find out what the arrangement is. So we have a situation where someone has purported to own the property. They have the keys to it. They're collecting the rent, and the rent from nearly 700 or 800 acres of prime agricultural land is not to be sneezed at, plus the many, many tens of buildings and facilities there that are rented to other occupiers at the moment, all seems to be going to someone who doesn't own the title, doesn't have ownership of the estate until 2024. And what's worse, Peter, is that the government has been telling us, and this is the joke, the Minister Gail Tierney went on the front page of local papers telling me that it was a vibrant and successful campus that they're paying rent for, of a property that they already actually own. And on top of that, the buildings, I went there myself to inspect on the weekend, they're not fit for occupancy. They've got close orders on them. And what little training is happening, and we're not talking students rocking up with laptops and doing courses. We're talking about the occasional occupational health and safety training course. Most of it's being conducted in the nearby footy club rooms, because none of the rooms in the literally tens or hundreds of rooms at the college aren't available for occupancy. It's insane, Peter.
So what sort of explanation have you got for all this from the Andrews government? And should we be concerned about the China link?
Well, yes and no. I mean, at the end of the day, business people need to be able to transact with the government of the day, and ultimately government's making choices. What seems to have gone terribly, terribly wrong here, Peter, is that this property was sold back in 2016 on the premise that the buyer would turn it back into a university, offering important rural and agricultural training and horticultural courses. It was promoted as logistics, training, all sorts of other skills and skill sets that we need desperately in rural and regional Victoria. And here we are in 2021, not a sod has been turned, nothing's been offered. And what we also learnt last week was that the requirement for education expires in 3 years' time, which means the owner of this property has bought it at a bargain basement price, hasn't delivered on the commitments to Victorian taxpayers, and will walk away with a property that they'll cash in on any day of the week for many, many millions of dollars more. This just speaks to how badly the Victorian government handles taxpayers' money. And we heard today the Premier, when questioned about the enormous blowouts on these tunnels here in Melbourne, and the Premier said, well, it costs what it costs. Well, who wants a guy running the state who's giving property away for next to nothing and then happy to write endless blank cheques for what it costs to build a tunnel? It's getting very bad here in Victoria, Peter, let me tell you that.
Just before we go, Richard, is there any way you could undo the sale on behalf of Victorian taxpayers?
Well, the sale doesn't settle to well after the next election. So absolutely, if Victorians choose that Victoria needs to be run by people that know where the money comes from, cares how much things cost, and absolutely will do their best to get best value for taxpayers' dollars when selling assets, then absolutely this contract will need to be looked at, reassessed, and certainly if we're going to give things away, then Victorian taxpayers need to get something for their hard-earned dollars, and certainly a property like this with its invaluable, priceless Australian artwork in it should not be going into the hands of any investor without fair return for Victorian taxpayers.
Richard Riordan, thank you for that. I think you're bringing it to our attention. We'll stay across that issue with you.
Good on you. Thank you, Peter.